Okay, so get this right. Giant ants. Buckle up, because today we are diving deep, deep into them, the 1954 sci-fi classic.
A classic.
And before you say anything, giant ants. Really. It's not some cheesy B movie, though.
Right.
Them really tapped into those Cold War fears in a way that's still, like, eerily relevant, even now, even in 2024.
It is. It is.
And we've got some, I think, a pretty fascinating mix of sources for this deep dive, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Academic analyses, those really get into it.
Oh, yeah.
The symbolism, all that. The film's TV tropes page.
Love it.
For some, pop culture takes, and get this, an article comparing them to cicada swarms.
Really?
Yes, really. It's wild. Just trust me.
Okay, so 1954, I mean, the world was kind of holding its breath. Everyone was terrified of nuclear war.
Yeah.
And them took that raw fear and gave it a gigantic scuttling form. But here's the thing. Even if you took away the whole Cold War context, the film still works.
Totally.
It's those primal fears about insects, right? The way they swarm, the way they're just so alien to us. I mean, that still gets under our skin, even if the special effects might seem, a tad dated now.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And that Gizmodo article you mentioned about the cicadas, they actually nailed it. It's the sound design in them that really makes it effective. Like, that scene where that little girl is just wandering around the desert?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It is eerie, even before you actually see anything. Just this, like, pulsating, unsettling.
It's that. Yeah, that's the brilliance of using sound in horror, right? Them builds this sense of dread, this anticipation, before you even see a single ant. And when you combine that with the girl's trauma, which, and multiple sources actually point this out, it is genuinely disturbing. It sets the stage for a film that really, it gets under your skin.
It's true. It's true. They really, the filmmakers really knew how to tap into our deepest fears. What gets me is that them starts off almost like a detective story.
Oh, totally.
You've got those two New Mexico state troopers, and they're out investigating something strange in the desert.
Right, right.
And at first you think it could be anything.
It's like a classic whodunit, but with, giant insects. And it's that slow burn, that gradual unveiling of the threat that makes it all the more terrifying,
Yeah.
Because it mirrors how we experience fear in real life.
Oh, for sure.
You get this sense that something is wrong, but you don't know what it is until it's too late.
And then bam, giant ants.
There they are.
Which, okay, I'll admit, on the surface, kind of ridiculous.
Right.
But what really struck me, going through all these sources, is how the film actually tries to ground this insane premise in some kind of scientific logic.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we all know, giant ants aren't scientifically accurate.
Of course. But that's not really the point, is it? It's about using this, this veneer of science to reflect the anxieties of the time.
Okay, yeah.
In the 1950s, there was this incredible optimism about science. But at the same time, there was this creeping fear about what we could actually unleash.
Makes sense.
Especially with the atomic bomb, which had only been around for, less than a decade when them came out.
Oh, the atomic anxieties were off the charts back then. I mean, people building bomb shelters in their backyards.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's interesting because unlike something like Godzilla, which is very specifically about Japan's experience with the atomic bombs, them taps into this, I feel like a broader, more universal fear.
Yeah.
Like, if it happened there, it could happen anywhere.
And that's what makes it so terrifying, right? It's not some far off threat. It's right there in the New Mexico desert.
Right in our backyard.
Exactly. It's the idea that the very ground beneath our feet could be harboring these monstrous creations, and we wouldn't even know it until it was too late.
And that plays into those primal fears we were talking about.
Totally.
Like those giant ants, even if they look a little fake now.
A little bit.
There's something about the way they're filmed, the sounds they make.
Ugh. Yeah.
It still taps into that, instinctive fear I think a lot of us have.
Totally.
Towards insects,
And it's interesting you mention the sounds.
Yeah.
Because that Gizmodo article, the one that compares them to cicada swarms, it talks about how those real-life insect invasions, they tap into the same primal terror that the film does.
Really?
Yeah. It's that blend of awe and disgust, that feeling of being totally overwhelmed by something that's both familial and utterly alien.
That is a good way to put it.
And what really gets me is that line about how every 17 years, well, I don't want to spoil it for our listeners.
Oh, okay.
But let's just say it makes you think twice about what's lurking beneath the surface.
Okay, so we've got creepy crawlies, Cold War paranoia, and now skid of swarms.
That's a lot.
I'm officially creeped out.
Rightly said.
But before we, descend even further into this this ant-infested world, let's take a step back and look at the historical context for a second. Our sources are pretty clear about this. Them is a direct response to atomic testing in New Mexico, right?
I mean, 100%. The film is a total product of its time. It's reflecting all those anxieties about nuclear annihilation, the Red Scare, the very real fear of radiation.
And its effects, yeah.
Exactly. It's not just the historical context, though. It's really, I think what's really compelling is how it takes these abstract fears, nuclear annihilation, sure, but also communist infiltration, even environmental collapse, which we're maybe a little more keyed into these days.
Right.
It gives them a tangible form, right? Those ants become our worst nightmares.
Yeah, yeah.
Made flesh.
Right. And the way the film plays with scale really just it just amplifies that fear.
Totally.
But we're talking about ants here, creatures that we literally walk over every day.
Yeah,
without a second thought.
Unless they're marching on your picnic basket, am I right?
Exactly. But in them, there are these massive, unstoppable forces,
Yeah, and it's not just that they're bigger.
Yeah.
It's that shift in perspective, right, that makes them unknowable in a way that, I don't know about you, but it makes my skin crawl.
Oh, yeah.
The filmmakers really tap into that feeling of being totally outmatched.
Yeah.
These ants aren't just big. They're like forces of nature, completely indifferent to human life.
And the sound design.
Don't even get me started.
I know, right?
The way those clicking mandibles echo in the tunnels.
Ugh.
Pure nightmare fuel.
We talked about the sound design before, but it's worth mentioning again because it's just so effective.
Oh, it's so good.
Like those amplified insect noises and then the screams of their victims.
Yeah, yeah.
It just all adds to that atmosphere of dread.
It's like Hitchcock said, there is no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it.
Oh, that's good.
Them understands that completely. It's a slow burn, right? It messes with your mind way more effectively than any jump scare ever could.
Okay. But even with all that atmosphere,
yeah,
we have to talk about the giant ant puppets themselves.
Okay.
I mean, come on, the special effects are definitely a product of their time.
A little bit, yeah.
But there's a certain charm to them, right?
Absolutely. They have a weight to them, a physical presence that you don't always get with CGI these days.
Right.
You can tell they put a lot of work into those puppets and it shows on screen.
Totally. And they were smart about how they use them, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like shooting from low angles to make them seem even larger.
Right.
Using shadows and silhouettes to obscure their movements.
It's very effective.
It's classic monster movie magic.
Honestly. Totally.
Okay, but let's dig back into the subtext here for a minute.
Okay.
We talked about how the ants can be seen as representing the communist threat during the Cold War.
Right.
But it goes even deeper than that, doesn't it?
I think so.
They're like this blank slate.
Yeah, yeah.
That we can project all sorts of fears onto.
Exactly. On one level, they represent any external threat to, to our way of life.
Yeah.
But you're right. It goes deeper than that.
Yeah.
The them 1954.pdf source, the academic one.
Yeah.
It argues that the ants embody this fear of the other.
Right. Right.
Which was definitely heightened during the Cold War, with the Red Scare and all that.
Right. It's not just about giant bugs, right?
No, no.
It's about the fear of infiltration. Of something like insidious lurking beneath the surface, just waiting to destroy us from within.
And that fear, sadly, it's not limited to the 1950s.
It's true.
Think about how often that us versus them mentality pops up even today.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's xenophobia, political polarization, or even just fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
That's something that them nails perfectly.
It's like the film is, I don't know, holding up a mirror to society.
Totally.
Showing us that the real monsters might not be the giant ants, but the fear and the division that we create amongst ourselves.
Precisely. But there's another layer to this this kind of environmental message that we haven't really explored yet.
Oh, you mean the fact that these ants didn't just magically appear?
Well, yeah.
They were mutated.
Right.
By atomic testing.
Exactly. They're a direct result of humanity's tampering with the natural order of them. It becomes this cautionary tale about the the unintended consequences of our actions.
Yeah.
How our pursuit of progress,
which is a very
backfire in terrifying way.
Very 1950s idea, right?
Totally.
Wow, so not only do we have giant ants terrorizing Los Angeles, but they're also a metaphor for our own self-destructive tendencies.
A little bit, yeah.
It's like the film is saying, like, hey, you created this mess.
Right. And what's scary is that message is even more relevant now than it was in 1954.
Totally.
We're facing the very real consequences of climate change.
Every day.
And it's easy to draw parallels between those irradiated ants and the environmental disasters that, we're seeing more and more of these days.
It's amazing how a film from 1954 can still speak to us so powerfully.
I know, right.
About these, like, contemporary issues.
Totally.
But them is more than just a cautionary tale, though, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure.
It's also just a rip-roaring monster movie.
Oh, absolutely. It's a wild ride from start to finish.
It's so good.
But what elevates it above your average creature feature is it's actually well made. Yes.
The acting is solid, the pacing is tight, and those set pieces, especially that ant attack on the Los Angeles River.
Oh, so good.
Pure cinematic brilliance.
Right. It's a masterclass in suspense and visual storytelling.
Totally.
And even if those giant ants look a little hokey now, you have to admire the artistry.
Oh, absolutely.
That went into creating them.
100%.
And let's not forget, the film's legacy, them, spawned an entire subgenre of giant bug movies.
It did.
I mean, without them, we wouldn't have classics like Tarantula.
Oh, such a good one.
The Deadly Mantis.
The class.
Even Rodon. Which, okay, that's a Japanese kaiju film about giant prehistoric insects, but still directly inspired by them.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because those themes of, nuclear anxiety, the monstrous consequences of scientific hubris. Those would definitely resonate in post-war Japan.
Absolutely.
But them influence. It goes beyond just monster movies, though, too, right?
Oh, totally.
You could see its DNA in everything from, Jaws to Alien films that tap into that primal fear of being hunted by something, bigger, stronger. Early Alien.
Speaking of them and its influence, did you know that Walt Disney himself was so impressed with James Arness's performance as that FBI agent?
Oh, wow.
That he considered him for the role of Davy Crockett.
Really?
Yeah, of course, Fess Parker ended up landing the part, but still.
Wow. I had no idea.
It just goes to show that even a supporting role in a well-made film can have a real impact.
That's a great piece of trivia.
It really speaks to the power of a strong performance, but beyond the acting, the technical aspects, even its place in film history, what I think makes them so fascinating is how it uses this outlandish premise, to explore these deeper themes about humanity, about fear, and our relationship with the natural world.
It's a monster movie with a brain.
Yes.
And a giant pulsating heart.
Right. But before we get too sentimental here,
okay.
Let's shift gears for a second and talk about one last aspect of them that I think is worth unpacking.
Yeah, go ahead.
The film's it's a complex portrayal of authority.
Okay. So, we've got these giant ants running around, a metaphor for those Cold War anxieties, the environmental disaster looming.
Right.
But there's another layer to them that I think is really interesting.
Okay.
And it's about, who do we trust when things go wrong?
The portrayal of authority, right. It's interesting. Yeah. It's not, as simple as you might expect from a 50s monster movie. It's not as easy as, the government's good or the government's evil.
Totally.
It's more nuanced than that.
You've got the scientists, the military, everyone's trying to figure out how to stop these ants, obviously.
Of course.
But you really see the pressure they're under.
Oh, yeah?
The weight of making these life or death decisions when you just don't have all the answers.
And that tension is really embodied perfectly in Dr. Medford.
Oh, yeah. The entomologist.
He's the expert, right. He's thrust into this role of having to advise those in power. But you see the doubt on his face, the knowledge that this whole crisis is in part a result of humanity messing with forces they didn't really understand.
Which goes right back to the 1954.pdf source.
Right.
And that whole idea of, messing with the natural order and having it backfire.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just that Dr. Medford is an authority figure.
Right.
But that he kind of represents science itself.
Yeah.
Being forced to clean up its own mess in a way.
And that's where the film gets, I think, really, really clever.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, you have this message that we need experts.
Right.
Like Dr. Medford, people who can guide us.
We need science.
We do. But at the same time, it's also saying, like, blindly trusting authority, even well-intentioned authority, it can be just as dangerous as any monster.
It's true.
So it's this weird, it's a very, like,
It's a paradox, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the film is giving us permission to question things, wouldn't you say?
Totally.
To not just accept what we're told.
Absolutely.
Even if it's coming from people in lab coats.
And that's a message that I think resonates maybe even more strongly today, don't you think?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, think about it. We're just like bombarded with information, everyone claiming to have the answers them.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds us to be skeptical.
Oh, yeah.
To critically evaluate information.
Especially when it's coming from those in power.
Yeah.
It's like the film is saying, and I love this, don't just sit there and wait for someone else to solve the problem.
Right.
Engage with the world, ask tough questions, and maybe, just maybe, you can help prevent the next giant ant infestation.
Right.
Okay, maybe not the ant part, but you get what I'm saying.
Well, there's that.
But it's about taking responsibility,
It is.
Being an active participant in shaping the world around you.
100%.
Which, honestly, kind of a powerful message for a giant ant movie, don't you think?
It really is. But that's what we keep coming back to, isn't it?
It's true.
Them is so much more than just a creature feature.
It's so good.
It's a film that works on all these different levels, and that's what makes it a classic.
Absolutely. It's got a little something for everyone, right? Thrills, chills, social commentary, a surprisingly nuanced exploration of authority.
Don't forget giant ants.
And giant ants. We can't forget those. Okay, so as we seal up this deep dive into them, what's like the one takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
For me, it's the idea that even in a story about giant mutated insects, it's the human element that makes it really stick with you.
Oh, yeah.
The fear, the choices we make, how we react when faced with the unknown.
Right.
That's what Them captures so well.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a good reminder, I think, that those anxieties, those questions about, who we trust and how we respond to crisis, they're just as relevant today as they were back in 1954.
Well said. Them is a film that just, it crawls under your skin and just stays with you.
It really does.
And who knows, maybe it'll even inspire some of our listeners to look a little closer at those anthills in their backyard.
Or maybe just be a little more skeptical of those in charge.
Right, there you go. Giant ants, Cold War chills, and honestly, a whole lot more to unpack than you might expect.
Who knew?
And on that note, we're going to leave you to ponder the deeper meaning of giant ants.
Enjoy.
Join us next time for another deep dive into a topic that's sure to surprise and, as always, enlighten.
See you then.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those bug spray cans handy.